We are beyond excited to launch the very first episode of Voices of IIS. If you've been searching for a space to learn about the wonderful people who work at IIS, to explore fresh perspectives, and get inspired, you've come to the right place. In this debut episode, we're setting the stage for all the incredible conversations, insights, and stories to come. Now, that introduction would have probably put a lot of pressure on our first guest, but I think he can handle it. Having served the Jamaat for over 4 decades, Dr. Shiraz Kabani joined IIS in the late 1990s. Welcome, Shiraz, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, your service to IIS is potentially greater than the ages of some of our listeners. We would love to hear about the journey that brought you here.
Well, after my undergraduate studies, which interestingly were in electrical engineering and computer science.
So nothing to do with the IIS.
No. And I joined the Ismaili Tariqa and Religious Education Board in the United States as their executive officer. And in that context, had the good fortune of interacting with people at the IIS, had the opportunity to attend the IIS ITREB meetings that had started since 1988, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd also attended some workshops at the IIS. Later in that term, I was invited to join some international meetings to discuss long-term programs that were being developed for the Ismaili communities, where I was able to contribute in conceptualizing some of those programs. After 11 years at the Tariqa and Religious Education Board, I left ITREB and went back to my field of computer science and joined an IT consulting firm as their managing director. But I quickly figured out that the commercial world was really not for me. And just around that time, I was approached by 2 agencies of the Ismaili Imamat. One is the Ismaili Leaders International Forum, and the other was the Institute of Ismaili Studies, to see if I would consider a role with them as their executive officer. After some consideration, I decided that I'll take the more difficult choice, which was to move continents and join the Institute of Ismaili Studies, because it was a more established institution, and also because of my interest in the field of Islamic studies and Ismaili studies. And so I joined the Institute in September 1999.
Wow. And can you speak to me more about your interest in Ismaili studies and how that came about?
Yes, certainly. So I had served as a lay preacher within the community, what is called a waz or an al-waz in the Ismaili communities. And in that context, obviously, you have to become familiar with some of the areas of Islamic studies and Ismaili studies. So I had dabbled into that since the 1980s. But then in 1991, I had the good fortune of attending a 3-week workshop organized by the IIS. And as it turned out, that in that gathering of some 25, 30 people from different parts of the world, I was the only one who did not have a background in Islamic studies. Mm-hmm. And I felt quite ignorant in that group. Mm-hmm. And I went back and decided that I needed to learn a lot more. A few years later, one of our friends, in fact, a common friend, Dr. Shenul Jiwa, recommended to me a list of books that she thought that I should be reading. And ever since then, I have made it a habit to read very regularly. And given that you are a preacher in a community, you end up having to speak on all sorts of themes and subjects. And so you can't focus on one particular area. You have to read very, very widely. And so after hundreds of books that you end up reading, you still realize how much more is out there that you need to learn. And so I continue to read quite voraciously. I've read most of the IIS publications as well. And so that's where my interest in Islamic studies comes from.
Absolutely. Now, actually, your relationship with the IIS definitely predates the 90s when you officially joined. And clearly, you've seen the IIS from the 80s to the 90s to the present, and you have been a part of its fabric. And you've had a chance to sort of have a front row seat to the growth of IIS. And so I would love to hear, and I'm sure our audience would as well, some experiences that have stood out during your time here.
Well, yes, I've been interacting with IIS since the late 80s and early 90s. But obviously, I became much more familiar with it when I came here. At that time, I think the Institute had about 35 staff and had a fairly small budget. And so I have seen the growth of the IIS since then, which has been actually quite dramatic. When I came here, Professor Azim Nanji was the director, and he had just arrived a year before me, and he was building his team. And so it was quite a privilege to be part of that team that ultimately led to the expansion of the IIS. Very soon after I got here, one of the projects that I was involved in was establishing the Institute's website, which I think was the first website of any institution of the Ismaili Imamate. And shortly thereafter, I was also involved in a campaign, a fundraising campaign called the Worlds of Learning campaign. I think you were involved with that as well.
Yes, I was.
That allowed the Institute to further strengthen its financial foundations, which enabled it to grow the way it has grown. What has remained with me has been the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the IIS in 2003, in which we were both involved.
Absolutely.
And of course, in one day, we held 3 events: a conference, a graduation, and a dinner with our donors. And His Highness the Aga Khan, in his capacity as the chairman of the Institute's Board of Governors, attended all 3 of those events. Those memories remain with me, of course.
Absolutely.
I've had the great privilege of being a secretary to the Board of Governors, a position that you now hold.
Yes.
And in that capacity, I have attended many meetings with His Highness. And of course, those are great moments that one remembers. In 2011, we developed the first long-term strategic plan of the IIS, and I had the privilege of leading or facilitating that exercise, and certainly that has taught me a lot and has remained a pleasant memory with me. Of course, when one has a 25-year career at any institution, there are many, many more such occasions that one remembers, but those immediately occur to me.
And I think also a big one would have been around the entire King's Cross project, because you had a big role to play, and not just you, well, you of course were with the IIS, but also you were vice president of the National Council.
That is correct. And in fact, it was more in the capacity as the vice president of the council that I was there, but it just so happened that I was also in the senior management of the IIS. So I was able to kind of play that dual role on that steering committee for a fairly long period. I think I was on that committee for about 7 years, and so contributed as much as I could in those days to the development and design of the projects at King's Cross, including this very building.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, what's interesting as well is you've had such a long career at the IIS, and you have sort of had multiple hats. Maybe you could speak to us briefly about all the various areas of work that you have undertaken at IIS and currently what your role looks like.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, if I had been in the same role for 25 years, this would have been very, very boring.
A boring first podcast.
And so I started here as the executive officer and board secretary. Shortly thereafter, as I said, that we had to run this campaign, and there was an opportunity, and I was appointed as the head of resource development and communications. A few years after that, around 2005, we brought together several departments at the IIS into one fairly large department, which was called the Department of Operations, Finance and Development. And that included all the non-academic functions of the IIS, including HR, IT, alumni relations, finance, communications, resource development, and so on. And I was appointed as the head of that department. I continued in that role till about 2012, if I'm not mistaken, and then was appointed as the head of the Department of Community Relations. And the large Operation Finance and Development department was broken up back into 3 or 4 separate departments. I led the Department of Community Relations until quite recently, about 6 months ago, when at my request, I was given the opportunity to head the Department of Communications and Development, which is the role that I currently have. So I've had those 4 or 5 roles over these periods, which has kept things interesting for me.
What was it about the IIS that attracted you?
So as I said, that of the 2 options available to me, this was the more difficult one. But what clinched it for me is that when I came to the IIS for meetings and interviews, I was asked to meet a number of people at that time. Interestingly, Professor Zain Qasim, who's currently the director, was here as a fellow at that time. And so one of the individuals that I met at that time was Professor Zain Qasim.
Wow.
But what fascinated me was the diversity of people, of cultures, of languages, and the sheer amount of talent that was encompassed in the profile of the people at the IIS. It was amazing that within one building, just amongst 35 people, that was that range that was available. Per square foot, I believe this had more PhDs than I had found anywhere else. And so that's what really attracted me to come to the IIS, because you really wanted to be in an environment of that nature where you meet different kinds of people, you have different cultures represented, you hear and participate in conversations in different languages, and that the talent pool was such that you wouldn't find anywhere else.
And I think that holds true today, because I know when I speak to people around the Aga Khan Center, some of the things that they talk about is just how diverse the staff at IIS are, how many languages they hear in the hallways, the different food that people bring for their lunches, and all the wonderful stories and exchange of culture and ideas. And I think now that we're a staff of, 120, that's just grown.
Absolutely. It has exploded since then. I remember meeting the first Tajik Ismaili here. I remember meeting the first Chinese Ismaili here, meeting the first Syrian Ismaili here. So it has been absolutely fascinating. And for anybody coming from a part of the world where they do not encounter such diversity, I think they would be fascinated to be here.
I think IIS has always been this sort of microcosm of the global Ismaili community.
Very much so, and beyond. Because, look, a majority of the staff at the IIS are actually not Ismailis. They come from all different traditions of Islam, but they also come from other religious traditions. And indeed, I've known of people here who don't belong to any faith tradition, and yet they are interested in this field of study. So, yes, it's an absolutely fascinating place to be.
Yeah, and I think it's also sort of the vision, the aspiration, the ethics of, the IIS and what we stand for.
Very much so. Very much so.
Shiraz, I would love to hear more about that decision you took to move continents and to uproot your family from America and to come all the way over to the United Kingdom at a time when probably there wasn't a whole lot of migration that way, and certainly from within the community. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, as I said earlier, that of the 2 choices in front of me, this was the more difficult choice because it meant uprooting from the United States and coming to London. I had a very young family. My son was 6, my daughter was 4. My wife, of course, is a professional herself, and so she had to give up her career there and join me here. Initially, it was quite tough. Because Europe, particularly London, is quite different from the context in the United States. I used to live in Texas, where everything is big, where there's lots of space. It's very hot. And you come to a place where everything is small. It was not at that time a service-oriented economy. which meant that everything felt difficult. And so I must say that for the first 6 months, there were plenty of occasions where my wife and I would look at each other and be asking the question that, have we made a mistake? Mm-hmm. But I think once we settled in, I must say that we never looked back, and that it has been a very pleasant experience, both for ourselves, our children, and I don't think we would have changed anything. The Institute indeed was very supportive in that transition. They made it quite easy for me and my family to get adjusted here. There was a lot of support. And while some people feel that careers in the humanities or careers in these sorts of not-for-profit organizations might require too much financial sacrifice, I must say that that has not been my experience at the Institute. And all of that meant that we were able to transition effectively and have had a very happy 25 years at the IIS and in London.
Is London home?
Yes, London is home, indeed. Even though I still have family in Houston, every time I go back to Houston, I must say that it no longer feels home. London indeed is my home.
I absolutely understand, coming from the States as well. And I must say my first encounter with you, Shiraz, was back in the States, probably in the 80s, where you came to deliver a WAS in Atlanta. And I think I must have been about 17 or 18. And then connecting with you again through the Institute and being, sort of sitting on the side of you during your journey here has been wonderful. And your first publication with IIS, Ismaili Festival Stories of Celebration, came out in 2021. And it's the first publication in IIS's Living Ismaili Tradition series. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about the series and how the project came about?
So as we know that the Institute has been engaged in research and scholarship since its very establishment in 1977. And over the 30, 40 years, the Institute had undertaken some very foundational research that was necessary. But over the last 10 years or so, His Highness has been very keen that we need to now find ways to synthesize that scholarship and present it in a way that a layperson without a background in Islamic studies would be able to learn from that research and scholarship. And so different modalities have been considered. One is to create new series of publications. The first one that was proposed to the board was the World of Islam series of publications. And one of the considerations was that whether there ought to be a separate series of a similar nature, but that is more addressed to the specific needs of the Ismaili community, where we can use a voice that the Ismaili community would be able to relate to more directly, where they would be able to relate to some of the terminology and the sources that are part of the Ismaili tradition. And therefore, a decision was made that there ought to be a separate series of a similar nature, but more specifically meant for the Ismailis. And hence, the Living Ismaili Tradition series was born. And I had the good fortune of being offered the opportunity to write the first publication in that series. As I said earlier, that I had been a lay preacher since the early 1980s. And around the 2015-2016 mark, one of the governors of the Institute had suggested that I should find a way to write up some of these sermons that I have been delivering so that this knowledge or this way of communicating could reach larger number of Ismailis. And so when this opportunity came up, which was, I believe, in about 2018, 2019, I thought this was a great way of communicating some of my ideas, some of my perspectives to the community worldwide. And having the opportunity to write about festivals meant that I had at least 10 different ways of approaching it, because there are at least 10 festivals that I could think of that the Ismaili community celebrates quite widely. And so while the book is about Ismaili festivals, and certainly people might learn a little bit about where these festivals originated, how they are commemorated today, what meanings they have for the different communities across the world. It is more about a perspective on what it means to be an Ismaili. Many people limit what it means to be an Ismaili to particular doctrines or particular practices. But I believe that there are certain characteristics that uniquely define the Ismailis that go beyond particular doctrines and particular practices. And so what I've sought to do in this particular publication is to present my perspective on what are those characteristics that make Ismailis who they are. And so I hope that those who read this particular book will find a perspective that they might be able to relate to, particularly if you come from the South Asian tradition, because that's where I come from, and therefore people from the South Asian tradition would be able to relate to it more than people who come from other traditions. The hope is that there will be a whole sequence of publications coming from different backgrounds, from different cultures, different traditions, so that collectively they will begin to paint a more complete picture of the Ismailis and what it means to be an Ismaili.
I mean, the thing I loved about your publication as well is that it's in your voice. So it's not as if one is reading sort of this academic publication, which is sort of in the, third person. It's actually, you feel like you're alongside the author in their journey through the various...
Yes, very much so, because I have written it the way I deliver sermons. I've written it in a conversational style as much as possible. And so it was a very deliberate attempt to make it accessible, make it relatable, make it easy for people to follow. So very short chapters, no hard words, so at least not too many. And each chapter stands on its own, which means that the person doesn't have to start from the beginning and go to the end. Absolutely. One could dip into the book from wherever they feel like. It could be nighttime reading. So if you're reading 6, 7, 8 pages to complete a chapter, that's a fairly easy read.
Absolutely. I cannot believe our time is up. It has flown by. I'd like to offer a huge thank you to our guest, Dr. Shiraz Kabani. It's been a pleasure to share this conversation with you. Be sure to check out Shiraz's book, Ismaili Festivals, Stories of Celebration, to learn more about the author and how various festivals are celebrated across the globe. You can purchase the book through your ITREB. To our audience, thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. I know there are a ton of podcasts out there, so it means a lot to us that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. That's it for today. I'm Selina, and this is Voices of IIS. Until next time, take care.